with Dave. Tonight, I have the pleasure of being joined by Ben Palmer from Adventures Await Studios, who's here to talk about his newest game, Torch and Dagger, a game set in a world of darkness and despair. You can currently buy Torch and Dagger on Drive-Thru RPG. Thanks for joining me tonight, Ben. I'm excited to have you on.
I'm happy to be here.
So, how did you get into role-playing games and what got you into them?
It's one of those things where I kind of grew up without friends, so I created a lot of my own worlds, my own play spaces, and that kind of led into later in life when I did have friends, and I grew my social circles, and I found like-minded people to build those worlds with and play in them, and kind of just see what trouble we can get up to, as it were.
So, what are some games that you've been playing lately when you haven't been working on or play testing Torch and Dagger?
I'm about to pick up Atomic Heart, probably. I'm pretty excited for that. I've been watching a lot of videos on it. I'm a big fan of Bioshock, so that's going to be my video game side of things. Um, Tabletop wise, I play a lot of Warhammer.
Nice.
I'm a 40K nut, and I have way too many minis and way too much gray plastic in my backlog that I have to paint at some point. Um, but when it comes to playing games, besides Warhammer and the occasional video game, I'm just always making stuff. I'm always making something new, whether it's a card game for a friend or a weird board game, or more variants of Torch and Dagger using that rule set. I really create more than I get to play these days.
I wish I were the same. I can't manage to get an adventure out of my head and onto paper. So, and it does look like you create a lot of stuff. How did Adventures Await Studios come to be?
Well, it was pre-pandemic, right before the pandemic started, maybe 6 months to a year before that, and I was running a lot of Adventure League for D&D, and I really liked the fact that my comic book shop had like open the drawer and pull out an adventure and go. I've run the Black Road. I've run probably 100 times for people at various comic shops, and I thought I could do this. I can come up with nice, concise, short adventures like this, and that was kind of the beginning of things. Was I was going to sit there and um, just kind of throw my ideas out, see what stuck. And at first, I had like 7 patrons on Patreon. It was completely a hobby. But I just knew if I kept putting stuff out, eventually it might hook. And with the pandemic happening, that really drove my numbers kind of through the roof, um, because people were inside and needed something to do. So with people not having able to go anywhere and suddenly get the explosion of D&D as a hobby, again, my stuff kind of came to the forefront, and I saw a few viral social posts later. I was rocking 400 to 500 patrons a month who were willing to shell out good money for the adventures I write.
That's fantastic, man. I'm very happy for you. Hard. So how many adventures, like I was scrolling through the Adventures Await Studio site today, and how many adventures, you probably know an exact number, have you put out? It looked like a
Um,
lot.
I I don't know the exact number. I've even lost count. I know it's over 130. Um, Between that, I've also done collaborations. I've done some commission work for different people. There's stuff I own, stuff I don't own anymore. So it's probably pushing 150 if I took all my commission work into account. Um, but yeah, it's a lot. It's quite a lot.
That is a lot. Like I was scrolling down and I'm like, good Lord, this man has put out a ton of work. What would you say are your top three favorite adventures that you've produced? Or is that like asking someone to pick their favorite kid?
No, no, I've got some favorites. The Mines at Kazakhstan was a really good one I did. It was early on in my career, but it has those three awesome pillars of, role play, exploration, and combat. The maps were really well done, I think. It has some cool, fun twists in it, and it actually was sort of my interview, as it were, to gain access to certain groups in the industry, like Discord servers, Facebook groups of like-minded collaborators. So there's people I've worked with in the past, like DM Dave, for example, that I've been able to work with people like him because of that adventure. It was kind of my here's what I do, here's me, and it performed really well in that regard. Um, I'm a big fan of first level adventures, or first to third. My very first adventure I ever wrote professionally was Something's Rotten in the city state of Denmarsh. And that was a first level adventure where the city reeks and you have to find out why. And it turns out that someone flushed their pet drake down the toilet and has clogged up the sewer with its nest. So you have to go fight the drake and release the sewage. And once again, it was like the first time I'm like, I'm going to write something professional. And of course, I write it full of turds. Um, but I love that one. And then one of the ones I really enjoyed writing was the Phalite Festival, which was kind of my take on Wild Beyond the Witchlight. And you basically enter this magical world through this tree that pops up once a year in a random part of the world, and you get to do a bunch of different fairy and fae themed mini games and get cool little prizes and solve kind of like a little puzzle, a little murder mystery kind of thing, or a missing child rather. And that one I really liked. That one was received really well.
Very cool. That sounds like a lot of fun. So I was writing those down. I'm going to have to go back and check them out where they're your favorites and give them a whirl. Can you tell me about the different tiers of your Patreon? How that all works for anyone that might be interested in signing up for it?
Yeah, absolutely. My Patreon is super simple. There is a $5 tier, a $7 tier, and a $9 tier. At each level, you get an adventure. So if you're signed up for $5, you get one adventure a month. You also get to vote in, not vote per se, but I have sort of like a town hall every month where it's like, what do you guys want to see? Throw me some ideas to kind of pick your brains. Then we have the $7 tier gets you a second adventure, and then the $9 tier gets you three adventures. You also get access to the full backlog of your tier and every tier below you. So I put out a copper, a silver, and a gold adventure every month. If you're in the silver tier, you can see all the copper and all the silver adventures I've ever put out.
Wow, that's a lot of bang for the buck. Patreon, man. I'm going to have to check that out. So, and I will also, as I was saying earlier, make sure that there's a link down below for anyone interested in signing up for that. So to get into Torch and Dagger, where that's your newest game, can you give a brief synopsis of it for folks that may not have heard of it yet?
Sure. So when it comes to role playing games, I always think back to a sort of a meme video I saw years ago on YouTube of someone is they filmed it in World of Warcraft, and the gist was the level 60 player runs up, and the level 1 player stands there and starts stabbing them, and they're stabbing them, and the level 60 player like goes and makes a sandwich and takes a nap and like forgets about it, and then comes back and they're like, oh, I have like 10% of my hit points, I should probably do something. They hit him once, he dies. And that always, that Dungeons and Dragons and role play in general is very much like that. At some point you reach a level where like you're kind of immune to like when you're level 18 in D&D, you don't really care if a goblin shows up. Like, it's a goblin, whatever, we'll just like fireball and walk away, whatever, it's cool. And that bothers me because everything I feel like should have threat. I think everything should have like a measure of danger to it, because in both real life and if you lived in that kind of fantasy world, a knife's a knife. It could stab you. It doesn't matter how long you've been out there doing it. Like, you're gonna get stabbed.
Right.
So Torch and Dagger was my attempt to make a more unforgiving, I would say, role playing game, but I wanted to keep it nice and simple so that anyone could sit down and pick it up. Like, I didn't want to have to be like, oh yeah, here's like an hour and a half of me explaining rules, plus we got to do a session 0, plus watch some YouTube videos, and then maybe you'll understand how this works. I wanted to be able to say, here's like 3 pages in a digest sized book. That's everything you need to know for the whole game.
That's awesome. Um, what inspired, well, you actually just told me what inspired you. I got to make sure I don't go through questions that you've already answered. Now, how long was Torch and Dagger in production before it?
On and off for like 3 years. To
Wow.
some extent, bits and pieces. I'm a big sucker for mechanics. I love dice, cards. I love prototyping. Like that stuff. I get a kick out of. So one day I was sitting around with a buttload of D6s, and I'm like, I can make a thing out of this. Like, let's what can I make that hasn't been made before? Because there's the classic D20 system, and then there's Powered by the Apocalypse's 2D6 system, and then there's like the D12 and the D6 systems for Lord of the Rings, and I'm just like I can come up with something slightly different, something that's just different enough that it'll be new. And as I did that, I kind of started writing rules and writing fluff that fit that, and it slowly evolved into a full-fledged game with 100-page rulebook.
Wow. That's pretty darn neat. I can't wait to check it out. So I saw that you had some print and play monster
Yep.
that you put out with this. What are some of the new monsters you're introducing to Torch and Dagger?
So with Torch and Dagger, it's less about like new custom monsters and more about giving meaning and thought behind the monsters we're very used to. So you'll see your standard skeletons and zombies and wizards and liches and vampires and werewolves. I mean, you also see onkegs and basilisks and odiogs and all the stuff that you're used to. But the key thing about the way the bestiary works in Torch and Dagger is every monster has four key things that are assigned to it. It's like the background on the monster, so you kind of know as the game master, like where it comes from, what it does, its strengths, its weaknesses, and its main drive. Because everything in the world should have a reason to exist. The skeleton isn't just waiting around for you to come over and bonk it to death. Like it exists for a reason. It's there to slay the living and bring revenge from beyond death. Like that's a skeleton. Zombies are stupid. Zombies are there to eat stuff. Like that's their whole drive. If you look at um, oh crap, I can't remember the name of the chicken monster that turns you to stone.
Pick a monster that turns you into stone. I'm drawing a blank as well.
I can't remember the name of it, but anyways, their whole thing is they peck everything until it turns to stone. They peck the stone until it breaks into pieces. But I wanted to give you like the tools you needed to be smart about your placement of things in the world and how things should interact together. So it kind of helps newer GMs build a more not meaningful or understanding, but more realistic world when you know why this person or why this creature is doing the thing it's doing.
Rather than just saying, oh, here's a skeleton.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you mentioned being.
Cockatrice. It's a cockatrice. That's what I was thinking of.
Yes. Oh, excuse me. Um, you mentioned really liking mechanics. Can you tell me about some of the mechanics that you're introducing in Torch and Dagger that we haven't talked about yet?
Sure. So I decided the system as a whole, I'm going to call it Tales by Torchlight. It's designed to be something simple you can play with a couple dice, maybe a pen, piece of paper, and a little bit of light with some friends. But it centers around abilities and traits. That's the core of every character. So every character has 5 ability scores. There's physical, tough, mental, cool, and social. Now, depending on the game itself, what that system is being used for, they might be called different things. But those are your core stats. It's like how am I good at physical stuff like running, jumping, fighting? How good am I at shrugging off damage, enduring poison? How smart am I? How perceptive? How good am I at keeping my cool under pressure? And how good am I interacting with others? So those 5 stats drive all your rolls. Whenever you roll something, you roll a number of d6s equal to your stat, and every 5 or 6 is a success. So some instances you may only need one. Some instances you might need multiple. The other side of that, with the implication of that within the system is that there are times you can't do something, which is very rare in most games. There's always like a 5% chance in D&D you're going to roll a natural 20.
Right.
When it's like realistically, no, you're never going to make that jump. You're never going to recall that lore that you never came across. You're never going to be able to hurt this monster that is 10 times your size and you have a stick. So I wanted it to I want to create a system that you're very clear, you're very aware of where your weaknesses lie, and what you are and are not capable of doing. Now, there are also traits that go with that. Now, the interesting thing, traits are your like class abilities, your racial abilities, your background abilities. They're all there, your magic spells, your holy abilities. It's everything that makes your character cool and gives them, more flavor. Now, when you roll your stats at the start of the game, you roll 7d6, you drop the highest and the lowest, and then you assign those remaining 5 dice to your stats. You add up the total value, and that determines how many traits you're going to start the game with. So the shittier your rolls, the more traits you get. So when you build a character, you're not like, ah, crap, I got like ones and twos for everything. Well, you maybe have ones and twos, but now you're going to get like, I don't know, like 4 or 5 traits. Whereas the regular character might get 2 or 3. And if you have really good rolls, you might only get 1.
Interesting. I really like that. Do you have any expansions planned for down the road for the game?
So I've actually written like 5 games using the system,
Oh, wow.
all in their own settings. So I do have a lot in the pipeline for Torch and Dagger. I plan on releasing additional adventures and magic items for it, with some really cool art by Dire Quest, the guy who did the art in the initial book. But I have my hope with the system was to design something that was flexible enough and fun enough that people would want to take it and create their own games with it. So not only do I have Torch and Dagger, which is my grimdark fantasy, I have Aces and Outlaws, which is my Wild West shoot 'em up cowboys and robbers kind of situation. I've got Spooks and Specters, which is like an X Files. You work for the government, you're sussing out aliens and monsters and all Bigfoot and all that jazz. Phasers and Photons, where you're the crew of a starship on a 5-year mission, like the Star Trek Enterprise out in the deep space. Um, and honestly, there's a bunch more. There's Pistols and Plunder, which is like a pirate themed one where you're commanding a pirate ship with a crew and going after treasure and raiding ships. It works with so many different settings that it works with my ADD. So when I get tired of one, I just hop on another one and I'm gonna work on this for 3 hours or until I get tired. But yeah, there's going to be a lot more released in the coming 6 to 12 months as I finalize artwork, layout work on these various books. But I want people to be able to pick a setting and say, okay, I can use this to play in the world I want to play in.
That's awesome. And it sounds like you've got a ton of options. And the fact that you say you want to get these out in the next 6 to 12 months just blows my mind. Like, that is a unheralded production speed.
Well, to be honest, most of them, the PDFs are all but done. Just got to replace my temporary stock art with some custom artwork and proofread a few things here and there. But I've been pretty busy the last year.
It sounds like it. And it looks like it looking at your site. Like, I felt like I could have just scrolled forever on there looking at the adventures that you've put out, and I love it. Will this become print on demand on drive-through, or are you keeping it as a PDF only?
I'm working on doing print on demand. The way I formatted the book didn't quite meet the requirements of their print department. So I'm working with their support to get my book kind of resized and margin wise, get it set to the way they need it done, so then they can print it for customers.
Gotcha. That's awesome. I can't wait. I am definitely a physical book type guy, and I can already tell you I'm going to have your whole collection of this series of zines for. I can't wait. I love sci-fi, and some of the adventures that stood out to me on the Adventures Await Studios site was Captain Starlight. What can you tell me about those adventures?
So the Captain Starlight Adventures were kind of a series of attempts to kind of breach the astral sea. Spelljammer was on the cusp of coming back, and I was like, I want to do something with space. something with monsters. Like, what can I do? And I was kind of getting into Starfinder a little bit. So I was like, I could write something kind of around this. And a good friend of mine at Mage Hand Press had put out Dark Matter, which is their take on space combat and kind of it's really, I mean, it's D&D in space. There's no other way to put it, and it's done phenomenally. I highly recommend it. Um, but I basically came up with the idea of this like old school retro, like bubble helmet sci-fi captain from out deep space who just shows up one day and is like, yeah, my ship crashed. I need help. And kind of reconciling his, his strange technology with the magic of the world and, the shenanigans that kind of came about with, an alien ship crashing on the world of Arden, my little fantasy realm. And over the course of three adventures, they help him repair a ship and head back into deep space. They eventually get a second visit from him where he enlists their help in tracking this massive alien monster on another world. So they go on kind of like a big game hunt safari on an alien planet. And then lastly, they get an unfortunate automated message from his ship that he has died,
Oh,
and that pirates have taken over his ship. And his dying wish is that they destroy the pirates and make sure his ship doesn't fall into enemy hands. So it's a fun little thing. I get to throw in magic items that normally you wouldn't see, blasters and alien communicators and spacesuits and things like that. But give them the magical fantasy twist that makes it still work within the bounds of D&D. I also got to work on and create some really cool maps that were a little different than what I normally would throw together.
nice. Now, you just mentioned your world of Arden. What can you tell me about that?
So Arden is the basically the realm where all of my adventures take place. Um, in my book that I put out on PDF this year, and physical copies will hopefully be ready or later this year as I fulfill the Kickstarter backers first. There's a big map that kind of showcases how Arden works, and the history of Arden is essentially the gods of law and chaos came together and were created and battled and kind of got bored and started kind of poking the muck and mire to see what they could make. And they made the elves first, and they wanted the elves around forever, so they gave them a sliver of their divinity, which is why the elves live so long. But the elves built this technological empire that rivaled the gods' power, so they were smited, and their empire was destroyed. Now the elves, they live in the forest under the canopy, hidden from the eyes of the gods. Then they made the dwarves, and the dwarves fell in love with the riches beneath the earth, the gems and the gold and all the shine things that shine. So they were kind of banished beneath the earth to live out their days. And the races of men were the last ones created. And one of the gods kind of cheekily screwed with the creation of it. So instead of getting like a perfect being, you got everything from gnomes to halflings to humans to orcs to goblins to all these various races that now populate the world. So the adventures take place across the various portions of Arden. There's a massive jungle to the south that's sealed away, kind of like Beyond the Wall in Game of Thrones, where there's few outposts and very little civilization out there. But that's where like the Ekamari, the snake people, come from, like the Wanti in D&D. There's the Great Elven Forest. There's the spine of the world, these massive mountains where the dwarves make their kingdoms and their lairs, and they have a massive underground highway system that they make their money off of tolls, because it's like you can go over the mountain or you can go under it real quick, but it's going to cost you a little bit. There's the Kingdom of Man, which is the giant greenery, rolling hills. It's your classic fantasy kind of realm as you would think of it. And then a lot of the adventures take place in a place called Crescia. Crescia is a small kingdom of merchant states at the north end of the main continent, and that's where all of my major cities are located. A lot of the adventures take place in that area, and it's your classic fantasy realm. You'll get vampires, you'll get liches, you'll get werewolves, you'll get goblins and orcs, but you get kind of a there's ways to link a lot of it together. So I have a lot of patrons who take my adventures and they turn them into full campaigns. I get requests all the time for a more detailed map. Like, where is this village in relation to this village? And I'm like, dude, I don't even know. I've got like 100,000 villages. Like, you do you, whatever makes sense. But but yeah, Arden's been just this. I needed something that was cohesive to kind of hold my world together like glue. And as I was writing, I kept reusing these different cities and these different villages and these different parts of the world, and it kind of just grew out of that.
Man, it sounds like you have woven a very rich tapestry. I'm definitely signing up for Patreon. It just sounds like I've got to dig into what you've built. It sounds amazing. Um, Let me see. I'm just going to breeze through my bullet points. I think we've actually touched on everything I had. Is there anything that you would like to discuss further that you feel like maybe we didn't touch on?
I mean, for me, um, the important thing for me is when it comes to my work is I want people to enjoy it and have fun. So I tell anyone listening, if you have a question about my adventures, always feel free to hit me up. I try to respond to every email I get. I have a full Discord channel for my patrons with some very active members across the world who always have something to offer. So so there's that, and then hopefully I'm hoping to bring. I attempted to bring it to fruition last August during Gen Con, but we weren't able to fund in time, we weren't able to fund at a rate where it was worth continuing the campaign. But I'm putting out eventually a book of magic items, 2 to 300 depending on the stretch goals we hit,
Wow.
fully illustrated with amazing artwork, and that's probably my next big project coming up the pipeline, which I'll definitely keep you in the loop on.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to have you back on when you get that going and talk about that. So, well, that was all I had, my man. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. It has been an absolute pleasure talking with you. And as soon as we get off here, I'm going and jumping on your Patreon because I've got to do it. And folks, if all of this sounded interesting to you, there are links down below in the description so that you can sign up for the Patreon and also check out Torch and Dagger on Drive Through RPG, along with a bunch of Ben's other adventures that he has on there. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, folks. And thank you again, Ben, for joining me. If you enjoyed this interview, drop a like on it and maybe think about subscribing to the channel. Have a good night.